So good. Hey, once again, welcome to church. You guys moving and grooving? You guys awake now? Get your jump on, you know what I'm saying? Like, make sure the blood's flowing. Want to welcome you guys. If you're new, hanging out with the first time, man, we think it's just incredible that you chose to hang out with us this weekend. We love it that you're here. If you don't know anything about our church, just know, hey, we're all about Jesus. We try to be absolutely clear. We're all about Jesus. We love Jesus. We think Jesus makes all the difference in our life, that we might not have things all figured out. We might not know what it means, but you know what? Anything is possible because of what Jesus has done for us on the cross. He can change our lives. He can turn things inside out. And so we're just glad that you're on this journey with us. And just, excited for you to be here. Also want to say hello to those that are watching live online, our live feed, or maybe you're tuning in live on Facebook right now. Thank you so much for joining us. We can't wait to see you again right here, physically present with us on any given Sunday. But before I jump into what I want to talk about today, I want to give you a quick heads up. Holidays are here. So hopefully in your program, you did get a card today. We would love your help with the holidays. We would love for you to join alongside us in just really helping people discover and follow Jesus. That is the mission of this church. We keep it really simple. Help people discover and follow Jesus, and we need your help with that. The holidays are a great opportunity to do that. We have a tree lighting coming up. We have all kinds of Christmas services. It's going to be a blast celebrating with you, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. Also, by way of planning, because I know the holidays can get crazy and kind of, out of control, you need to know that on November 25th, we have a couple of big announcements to make as a church that we want to make you aware of. I can't share all the details right now. I can't promise it'll be online, right? But if you're here on November 25th, just saying, you'll get the scoop, all right? You'll know what's going down, and we want to keep you aware of what God is doing and all the fun and exciting things that we get to look forward to. But for today, we're going to jump into part 2 of living my best life. Part 2 of what does it mean to be living my best life? And the central question that we're talking about is, what do you do with what God has given you? What exactly do you do with what God has given you? This is an important question for us. So I said I'm excited about this series, but also I'm a little nervous about this series because what we need to talk about over the next few weeks I think is important, but it makes people uncomfortable. It makes people kind of feel a little awkward and weird. No matter who you are, where you're from, it just makes you feel awkward when we start to talk about this. But I'm super encouraged, and I really believe that this church is ready for it because, one, I believe you have a heart to lean into what God is trying to teach you. You have a heart to lean into the more that God has in store for you. And even though I told you up front what we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks, you still came back, right? Like you didn't find something else to do, which you could easily have done, right? Like, when you know that we're talking about this concept that many of us actually feel like we already do, or that we already are, or at the very least, we already know everything there is to know about. It's the idea of generosity. Generosity. Understand, when I'm talking about generosity, I'm not talking about giving. I'm not talking about giving. I'm talking about generosity. Jesus didn't call us just to a life of giving. Jesus actually called us to a life of generosity, and there's a big difference. What does that difference look like? Well, Jesus says the difference is that if you can embrace this lifestyle of generosity, that you could live the blessed life. Not just a good life, not just an okay life, but that you would actually begin to live into the blessed life. But here's what I want to do. I want to teach us about generosity over the next couple weeks, and I want you to dialogue about it in your groups. And as I talk about generosity, I want everybody to do something with me real quick. Everybody breathe in, breathe back out. You know why I did that? So that you can smile at church, okay? Like, the reality is I'm not asking you for anything, okay? I'm not going to talk for a few weeks about generosity and then be like, all right, so now we've been talking about this. Are you guys ready to give? You know what I mean? Like, we're not going to roll out like a generous plan, nothing like that, right? We're not asking anything from you. All I'm asking you to do is dialogue, to think. When Jesus teaches about generosity, he's not doing it to try to make you feel bad. He's not doing it to make you uncomfortable. He's trying to get you to think about the way that you're living your life in respects to what do you do with what God has actually given to you. What do you do with what God, do you want to live this idea of the blessed life? In other words, Jesus isn't trying to get something from you. Jesus, he wants something for you. He wants your freedom. He wants you to live the blessed life. How do we know? Paul says that this was Jesus' own words, right? Jesus says, can't forget this. He was talking to Jesus' followers. Paul says, I remember the words of Jesus where Jesus said himself, it is more, here it is, blessed to what? Give than to receive. To which everybody kind of does this and kind of gets a little uncomfortable because you're like, I don't know. I've been on the receiving end, and that kind of feels good too, right? You know, it's like, it's cool to get stuff sometimes. Like, it's not a bad thing when somebody gifts you with something, right? Yeah, no, that's awesome. He's not saying that you should never receive something. He's not saying that you should never get things. But what he's saying is that you have to be mindful of what you've been given, that it's important to know what you're doing with that. And it's blessed. It's more blessed, meaning you can take the pressure off. You can breathe easier. You experience much less stress if you are willing to be a person who lives generously, open-handedly, and not have to worry about trying to control it all on your own. Not worrying about having to control everything as you see it to make it fit. We said that this series is important for us because there's not one of us in here that doesn't want more of the blessed life, right? Like, we all want to be blessed. We would say that we're blessed right now, but if I said, hey, do you want to be more blessed? You'd be like, absolutely. But then also we said that, this is meaningful to us because this is who we say we are as Cityline Church. Yes, our mission, helping people discover and follow Jesus. But how do we do that? We pursue Jesus, right? We build community. We choose to live generously, time, talent, treasure, and we take a next step and say we want to lead well. That's how we live out this life of following Jesus at Cityline Church. If we're not going to live generously, then guess what? We should stop talking about it. We shouldn't say that's who we are. We should just go a totally different direction. But I think Jesus is calling us to lean into this, to actually kind of press in. And when I press into this, here's what I want to say up front. When I'm talking about generosity, because I know some of us have an idea of what generosity is, I'm not talking about random acts of giving. Okay, I said that last week. I just want to preface that again. I'm not talking about random acts of giving. Random acts of giving are awesome. They're great. They're needed. I think we need more people randomly giving. But I think it's more than just random. Generosity is not just a random thing. Generosity is not a guy like me standing up here telling you something, sharing some of you, trying to cast a positive, compelling story, showing you a few pictures, and then maybe trying to get you to give. Is that good? Yeah. Do we need that? Yeah. Is that important? Yeah. But I think that what Jesus is calling us to, this idea of living generously, goes way beyond that. Because you know what? Generous people, it goes way beyond just this idea of feeling obligated or feeling guilted into something or feeling inspired by something. That truly generous people, they're not swayed by emotion or obligation. True generous people have made a choice in advance to orient their life around generosity, to being a generous person, knowing that it is more blessed to give than it is to receive. So what exactly does that look like? I'm so thrilled that you're asking those questions, okay? Because I think Jesus has some stuff to say about it. Today, I want to get, next week I'm going to get super practical on how to take some next steps. But today, I think we have to identify what's blocking us from generosity. What's actually blocking us from generosity? Let me ask you in this way. Has anybody ever felt like the angst of like financial tension? You know what that's like. The month is tight. You know what I mean? Like the bills are due. Like you're not sure how you're going to pay for this or that. Something happened, the unexpected came up. And it's all this financial tension. Here's what I want to say about financial tension sometimes and that financial kind of uncomfortableness that we feel. I think most people feel financial pressure a lot of times in their life because they've never learned this idea of generosity. They've never learned what it means to actually be generous because there's a big barrier that stands in the way to you and I being generous. The single biggest barrier that stands between you and I truly living the blessed life, I would suggest is, very few want to say it. Right? Worry. We worry about so much. We worry about if we're going to have enough. We worry. If there's any word that is synonymous with money or connected to money, it would probably be this idea of worry. We always worry if we will have enough. We worry. I'm a parent, so I'm getting this right now as my kids get older. We worry about how we're going to pay for college. We worry about our future. We worry about our home purchase. We worry about the next thing that we have to. We worry about where is this money going to come from that we know that we're going to need eventually. Will we ever have enough? We think, though, that if we could just reach a certain amount or a certain income level, if we can get to a certain number in regards to maybe our future savings, that finally we've arrived and we actually have enough. But those of you in this room that have reached that point where you feel like you have enough, it's not enough. Because the moment that you start thinking you have enough, there's this weird thing that happens. You start thinking about all the what ifs. right? Anybody ever done that? Like the what ifs? I feel like I have a savings plan, but what if the car breaks down? You know, like what if? What if this situation? What if there's a medical bill? What if there's this? We can't predict our future. We don't know what's ahead of us, but we have all these what ifs that are driving us to worry. We worry about all these things and it overtakes us. There's a genuine fear that grips our hearts when we talk about this idea of generosity. And when worry begins to consume our lives, it does some very interesting things to our life. I mean, think about it this way. When worry grips our life, it causes us to think in irrational ways, and it causes us to act in irrational ways. It causes us to actually go against those things that we actually know to be true. And so I want to walk us through what that looks like, because I know some of you are like, I don't believe you. I used to trust you until today. You know what I mean? Like I got, okay, so just hang out. We're going to talk through this. Again, I'm not asking anything from you. I'm just asking you to wrestle with this, wrestle with the implications of what this might mean. I'm going to do it in the form of a diagram because, I'm a visual person and I think maybe this will be helpful to you. And this is something that's not new to me. Like I borrowed this. So before you go thinking like, he's a genius, you know what I mean? Like, no, like I borrowed this. Okay. I'm just going to tell you up front. Okay. I borrowed this. Okay. But I thought it was genius. So I'm like, hey, it's going to be helpful to us. So we said we worry. We worry. And why do we worry? Well, we worry because will we have enough? We always think that. Will it be enough? Wherever we're at, whatever income level, like I said, will we have enough? And because we worry, will we have enough? Then it takes us to the next space. This is crazy, right? Like we worry, will we have enough? And because we're not sure if we'll have enough, worry drives us to spend more. I can't explain it, but it just drives us to spend more. And this is how we spend, okay? Think about your spending, and this might be true of you. We tend to consume more than we can afford. I don't know why we do that, but we get so freaked out about worry, not sure if it'll ever be enough, thinking we got to seize every opportunity. We got to get all we can now. We got to get it while we're getting paid now. We got to get it while we have this job now. And so it drives us to spend more and consume more than we can actually afford. And spending more and consuming more than you can actually afford leads you to what? To debt, right? It leads you to debt. Why? Because we say this, I need it now, but I'll pay for it later. I need it now because I'm fearful, I'm worried that I'm not going to have what I need. It's not going to be enough. I'm going to need more. So I'm going to get it now, but I'm going to try to pay for it later. And because we get it now and pay for it later, you know what that does to us? It drives us to limited capacity. In other words, you got no wiggle room. You got no margin in your life. In other words, you can say it like this, and maybe you've used this term in your life. Everything is maxed out. Okay, it's maxed out. It's maxed. It's to the limit. I have no capacity, to which when you have no capacity and everything is maxed out, what do you naturally do? You begin to worry about your future. You begin to worry about, will I have enough? You begin to worry about what's next. And then here's what happens. The cycle just keeps ticking and ticking and ticking and ticking. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, why are we living this way? What's driving this kind of living? What's causing us to go against the things that you and I are going to discover today that we would probably say we know is true, but yet for whatever reason, worry has gripped our hearts and it's begun to block this idea of living a generous life. And now we're not sure what step to take next. Why do we live this way? I want to say that we have to get down to the root cause before we can actually take next steps towards generosity. And I think the root cause is this whole cycle of living is actually driven by a mentality. It's being driven by a mindset. I'm going to give you two ideas of mindsets. You can figure out if you're one, if you're both, or if you've lived in one or the other, whatever it is. But I hope you'll take some notes because I think this might be helpful. The first mindset in recognizing the root cause of why we are on the crazy train of the worry cycle, right? You know what I mean? It's like, it just doesn't make any sense. It's simply this. It's the scarcity mindset. It's a scarcity mindset. And here's what a scarcity mindset does. Scarcity mindset doesn't ask the question, will it be enough? Scarcity mindset says, there'll never be enough. In other words, we've resigned ourselves to living in a state of lack. We look around us and in our world, in our economy, whatever we think that like we get from, like we consume from, and we think there will never be enough. So I've got to get all I can right now. I've got to hold on to it. I've got to save it. I've got to get it all for me right now because there's not going to be enough to go around. If I don't get what I need right now, then I might not get what I am supposed to have because you know what? The resources are going to run out. You know what's crazy about this idea of this scarcity mindset that many of us live in? Scarcity mindset pulls our focus off of God and places our focus on us and what we think we want and what we think we need. It puts the focus on us to get the job done, to manage the outcomes, to take control of the situation, this idea of this scarcity mindset. Why? Because worry says there will never be enough. But we know this. Faith says there will always be enough. We would say true to that, right? Like faith says we always know that there will be enough. But the question when it comes to the scarcity mindset always comes back to, what do you and I believe about God? What do you and I believe about who God is? Do we believe that God is actually not a God of scarcity, but a God of abundance? How many of you would say that you might think that God is a God of abundance? Most of us would say we kind of know that to be true. We're kind of testing that out. We've heard that at the very least. Somebody told us once that God is a big God and that he's a God of abundance and he can do all things. So then the question is, do you believe that God can provide? Do you believe that God knows your need before you know your need? Do you believe that God will supply all of your needs? Get this crazy statement. According to his riches and glory. Not your riches, not everything you think you need, not trying to grab for more because you think it's somehow going to run out. But God has an endless supply, apparently, of riches, according to Scripture, that he is willing to provide for you out of if you're willing to trust him. Or the opposite is true. You can think that God is mean and that God is stingy. And God's only going to give you so much, and then the rest of it's up to you. It's the scarcity mindset that keeps us stuck in worry. Here's another mindset that might be weighing us down, especially in our culture today, the consumer mindset. It's the consumer mindset. And you know what the consumer mindset does? Consumer mindsets come with an assumption. It comes with an interesting assumption. It comes with the assumption that everything that comes to me, well, of course, it must all be for me. Right? Don't we think that way? It's my paycheck. Right? It's my job. I bought it, I earned it, I worked for that, we use all this, it's mine, it's ours, it's me, it's like everything, right? It's like, and you're not singing, right? You're more like barking, get off my stuff, because everything that comes to me, it must somehow be for me. It's the assumption that I'm to consume everything. You know what's interesting? When Jesus talked about this idea of consumption and consuming and believing that everything that comes to you must be all for you, Jesus kind of summed it up in one word that's going to make everybody feel comfortable if you've ever felt this way in your life, because you don't see yourself as this. But you know what Jesus said it looks like? Jesus says that's greed. Greed. When you think that everything that comes to you must all be for you, Jesus says that is greed. To which you say, but I'm not greedy. I know, that's where I got you. I'm not greedy. Because you know why? You're thinking of that one time that you did something good. You're thinking of that one time that you bought somebody lunch in the office. You had a brilliant idea on the way to work. I'm going to buy that person lunch today, right? That was 3 years ago, right? You've not done it since, right? Because you were they didn't even appreciate it, right? I tried to buy them lunch and they wanted extra. They wanted steak, you know what I mean? I was it's a sandwich, bro. Because everything that comes to me must be for me. And if everything that comes to me is for me, then guess what? I'm not prone to share. I'm not prone to live open-handed. I'm prone to live closed-handed. Why? Because I live in the tension that we most often face that is actually being driven by everything we think we want that we can't get instead of everything that we need that we don't have. It's all about our wants. It's all about our desires, and we're frustrated that we can't get it. We don't want to give any of it away, because if we give it any of it away, then it's going to get even further away from the thing that I actually want. Who would do that? Right? So Jesus had some thoughts on that. It's found in Luke 12:15. Then he says to them, Jesus teaching to those that were following him, this is crazy. He says, watch out. Be on your guard against what? All kinds of greed. So there's not just one kind of greed, right? Because some of you are trying to take yourself out of the story right now. There's not just one kind, there's all kinds of greed. That greed is greed. It's a condition of the heart. It's a condition that happens when chances are you've been so consumed by the worry cycle that you can't not live open-handed. He says, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Why? Why would we do that, Jesus? Well, because life does not consist of an abundance of your stuff, of your money, of your possessions. And I love that he sets it up this way because Jesus is going to tell us why in a little bit. And I think it's going to, right? It's going to like you're going to get to a certain point in the story and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, that's so true. And here's what I know about you. You're not going to want to admit it, right? You're going to be like, I know that it's true, but I hate, that's the part that I don't like about the whole thing. You know what I mean? It's like, just hang on. Like, I think it's going to be good for us to, at the very least, dialogue and talk about this. Why? Because greed, if we're not careful, greed always leads to worry and discontentment. In other words, Jesus says this idea of worry, this idea of whether or not you're going to be generous or not, has nothing to do with money. You're like, huh? You've been talking about money since you started talking today. No, Jesus says this idea of greed and what you do with your money, it has nothing to do with being generous or not. You can choose to still be generous. And you're like, well, what do you mean? Well, let's talk about this. We worry because we don't have enough, so we spend more and we consume more than we afford. That drives us into debt. We need it now, pay it later. And there's limited capacity, we're maxed out, right? And then it drives us back into worry. Have you ever thought about this? How much more money would you need right now to no longer worry? You know what my answer would be? A lot more than what I have now. To which all of you would say the same thing. But we know that when we arrive at that, guess what we're going to feel? We still need more than that. Why? Because money's not the issue. It's in our heart. What do you mean? I spend more and I consume more than I can afford. Why? Could that be a deeper issue than money? Could that be a self-control issue? Could Jesus be calling us to the fact that it's a self-control, it's an internal issue? It's not about your outside circumstances. It's not about what you make at work. It's not about it's about this self-control issue. Well, what about this debt thing that we know we got to get out of debt and we want to get out of debt, but there's all these things that we need right now. We got to get it right now. And we decide we'll try to pay for it later. Jesus says, well, maybe that's a contentment issue. Maybe we're not content with what we have right now. Maybe you do need the latest upgrade. Maybe you do have to go after that shiny thing because, everybody else has a shiny thing, so why can't I have a shiny thing? And you want to go get the shiny thing instead of saving money for the shiny thing and then buying the shiny thing because you're living in the worry that as soon as I save up enough money to get the shiny thing, you know what everybody else is going to be doing? They're going to get the brighter thing. And then I'm still going to be behind, right? And so I'm trying to keep up, which is really, it's a contentment issue. Right? And then maybe this idea of limited capacity and being maxed out, you know what that really is? That's more of a discipline issue than anything. It's implementing a plan, implementing some discipline to say, no, I'm not going to allow myself to reach a certain point where I can't breathe because I'm so overwhelmed by the financial concern that I have placed upon myself, that I've gotten myself into. See, it's easier to always point to circumstances. It's a lot harder to say, I'm a part of this. I'm a part of this, right? Which, again, leads us to the question, why do we live this way? To which Jesus gets to a point and says, this idea about worry, it has nothing to do with your money. You know what it's all about? There's a spiritual problem. Worry goes back to this spiritual problem that you and I have. It's the way that we view God. It's the way that we see God. Can God be trusted? Is God who he says he is? Will God come through for me like I know that he can, that he's supposed to? Because we know that regardless, if we got more money, that would not equal more self-control. If we got more money, that would not equal contentment. If we got more money, that would not equal discipline. Think about it. The habits that you've created now, they will continue to be your habits even when you get to where you think you need to be. Whatever you have implemented now, whatever you are doing now, chances are you will continue to do when you finally feel like you have some more, when you finally reach enough. Why? Because the main issue is a spiritual issue. It goes back to us and God and how that works in our life, because we know that more money and stuff will not eliminate our tendency towards worry. Only God can do that. Money promises safety, security, big dreams, all this stuff, and it's providing all the things that, guess what? Only God can actually provide. Money provides us a false hope. God provides us the only thing that is everlasting, that will never change, that will always stay. In other words, we worry because we have placed more trust in our possessions than in the one who actually generously provides for us. That's the biggest contentment issue. That's the biggest worry issue. We've placed more trust in our stuff than in God, who's provided all things for us. So worry is not a money issue. Worry is a spiritual issue. See, you know why we know it's a spiritual issue? This is pretty cool. When you open up the pages of Scripture, you know what Jesus didn't do? Jesus never said to eliminate worry from your life, earn more money. Jesus never, you don't read in here anywhere in the Gospels where Jesus says to finally stop worrying, just get a better job. He just doesn't do that. You know what I'm saying? Like nowhere in there. He doesn't, because Jesus knows that the idea of worry is not about your money. It's not about your stuff. It's not about the things that you think that you need. It's about how you view him. He understands that what he is trying to teach us, this idea of living generously, it actually breaks the crazy cycle. It breaks the cycle completely. So Jesus goes on and he talks about it to set it up as an illustration. The way he does it, by way of a parable. I love that Jesus talks in parables because parables are made-up stories. Okay, it didn't actually happen. Jesus talks about this made-up story to provide an illustration that points to a true thing. It points to a point to help people grasp something true that, guess what? They probably already know. Okay, so I'm going to give you a heads up. You probably already know, but the story just makes it so much better. Okay, it's awesome. So it's in Luke chapter 12, okay, where we just came from. He says this, and Jesus told this parable. He said, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. Pause for a second. We've already got a rich guy. Okay, he's wealthy. He's a business owner. The business is flourishing. And not only is the business flourishing, guess what? I mean, they've got extra now. Why? Because his harvest, he has an abundant harvest now. He's got so much, okay? And Jesus goes on, just painting the picture for us. He's got so much. So he thought to himself, he said, self, like what shall I do? Like what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. I've got so much stuff. What am I supposed to do with all this extra? How do I handle all this? And then he goes on, he said, here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And then there, I'm going to store my surplus grain. Are we following the story? He says, hey, I've got so much. I've got just like more than I could ever need. So I know what I'll do. I'll buy a bigger house. I know what I'll do. I'll get a bigger car. I know what I'll do. I got so much stuff. I think I'm going to need a storage unit. Or, you know what? I need a bigger garage for sure. Whatever that is, I need something. What I have is the barns were perfectly fine barns. They just weren't big enough to store all the surplus and the extra that he had. So he tears down perfectly good barns to build even bigger barns to store the extra stuff in it. Do you know that sometimes we do that too? And some of you, I get it. You're like, I don't have any surplus anything, right? Because you don't use the word surplus, right? We use words like disposable, as in, this is just my disposable income. What does that mean? That means I have a certain kind of thing I've set aside that's, disposable. Can you imagine trying to tell somebody in a third world country about your disposable income? You're like, I don't even use the word disposable. Okay, let's dress it up even more. This is just my fun money. This is just the money that I just have fun with. This is the money I've set aside. I paid some bills to do that. But this is just my fun money that I just, you know what I do with my fun money? Just blow it. You know what I do with my fun money? I don't know. Whatever happens, happens. You know what I mean? Like, it's my surplus. I've built up so much. I've got extra and extra. And you know what I do with the extra? I don't know. Whatever feels right, whatever looks good, I don't know. Just extra. This is exactly what we do. Jesus is getting to the heart of that the habits that you've created right now are the same habits that you will continue to have even when you feel like you have more than what you need. He goes on, he says, so I'm going to say this to myself. Once I've built bigger barns, it gets even worse. I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. So here's what you got to do. Take it easy. Right? Kick back, relax, eat, drink, be merry, like no stress expressed, like living the good life. You know what I mean? Like whatever it is, right? Like I'm just gonna chill because I've worked so hard and I finally made it. I finally have enough, to which at this point, right? Jesus has got the crowd like right where he wants them. Everybody's leaning into the story. They're like, Jesus, that sounds awesome. I like this parable. Let's build bigger barns and let's all just chill, right? Like, let's build bigger barns and let's just, a few drinks. Cheers here, there. You're like, that sounds great. And then Jesus suddenly throws in a plot twist and he says, but God said to him, you fool. Whoa, take it easy, Jesus. I like this story. Remember, I'm following you. He says, but you fool. He says, this very night, guess what's going to happen? Your life will be demanded from you. You've worked so hard. You built bigger barns. You stored all your surplus. You're sitting back. You're living the high life, like having a good time. You're like, everything's great. But guess what? It's foolish to think that is contentment. It's foolish to think that everything is all good. It's foolish to think that you finally reached enough, because here's what's going to happen. Your life could be demanded from you. And then the question that Jesus turns on him is, then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? Then who's going to get all the stuff that you worked hard for? To which the response would be, well, somebody will. Maybe your kids will. Maybe the bank will. Maybe some creditors will. But here's why. Not because you were generous, because you no longer exist. Not because you built your life around this idea of generosity and living open-handed and doing something great with what you have right now, taking Jesus up on his offer to be a part of something greater in your life. No. They'll get it because there is no choice. You no longer exist. And you know what they're going to do with it once they get it? Spend it, sell it, get rid of it. And you know this to be true. Anybody who's ever dealt with this in your family, where you know the family dynamics when somebody is deceased and passes away, and you see the craziness in the family about everybody wanting to get the stuff that somebody worked so hard for, and then once they get it, what happens? It's gone in a matter of months. Why? Because we're never going to feel like we have enough. Your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? He goes on, this now. Now this is interesting because Jesus now reflects back to us. In this story, he's no longer just talking to that group that's there. It's no longer just us finding ourselves in the story. I believe that Jesus asks us today, Cityline Church, the people in this room, he says, listen, here's what you have to know about that scenario, about that parable, that made-up story. This is how it will be. Meaning present day, current, right here, right now. This is how it will be with, guess what? Whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. This is what it looks like to live a life of constant worry, being stuck in the worry cycle, feeling like I'm never going to have enough, so I'm going to build bigger barns, I'm going to store, I'm going to hoard, I'm going to get all this together from myself. He says, be careful with that, because this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God, is not willing to see that all that they have and all that they've been given has originally first started out given to them by God. It might have come by way of your paycheck, but you got to know it came from God first. It might come from the hours that you put in overtime, but it came from God first. What if we begin to think that, what does it look like to actually be rich towards God? Because Jesus is very clear. For those of us who have a hard time living open-handed, you usually end up empty-handed. For those of us that have a difficult time living open-handed, we end up empty-handed. Why? Because there's an often forgotten reality about God. You're like, that's a weird fill-in. Like the sentence doesn't end. It's like, that's a weird sentence, right? Because it continues, right? To this next passage, this reality that you and I forget about God is that the earth is the Lord's. I don't know if anybody knew that or not. We know this, right? Remember, worry makes us go against what we know to be true. Worry gets us in a cycle that is unhealthy for our life. The earth is the Lord's. Let's be reminded of this today, church. The earth is the Lord's, and guess what else is the Lord's? Everything in it. The earth is the Lord's, and so is everything in it, the world and all who live in it. God owns it all. It all belongs to him. Scripture is very clear that everything belongs to him. What if we begin to live like everything belongs to God and he's entrusted it to our care to be stewards over, to where we are generous towards God? That we begin to see people as God sees people. That we begin to act as the hands and feet of Jesus with all of our stuff. It requires us thinking differently, rethinking what you do with what God has given you. It requires a mental shift from a scarcity mentality and a consumeristic mentality to seeing different. And so in our last few minutes together, I want to give you quick 3 quick fill-ins. I don't have a lot more time with you, but just I think this is going to be important for, at the very least, to start thinking about what would it look like. Could we just imagine together what would it look like to live in what I'm getting ready to explain? Just think about it. Again, I'm not asking anything from you. We already took up the offering, right? There's nobody standing in the back on the way out with bags. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's nothing, none of that's happening, okay? Here's the reality. I just want you to think, what would it look like to begin to rethink what God has given you? Because I think people who orient their lives around generosity, people who align their lives with generosity, they see things differently. Here's what we know about those who are generous. Generous people think like managers and not owners. Generous people think like managers and not owners. They don't think that, I own it all, or that it's all mine, or that I worked so hard for it, or that, it's my paycheck, or that's my account, that's my money. No, they see themselves as managers, that God has entrusted it to their care, that they are to be good stewards over what God has given to them. So they hold things open-handed. They're willing to share with others. When God places a need on their heart, when God nudges them, they don't sit there and fight with God and try to justify why they won't give it away, because they know that if they give it, they're not living in a scarcity mentality. Scarcity says there'll never be enough. They're living by moving in faith, trusting in God, knowing that there will always be enough. No matter what it is, there will always be enough. Why? Because we're managers over what God has given to us. And here's the great thing about management. This even works in your day-to-day world, right? The great thing about management is simply this. If you do a good job managing, you know what they do? They entrust you with more to manage. Jesus says, if you'll be faithful over what I've already given you, guess what will happen? As you begin to live open-handed and even be generous and begin to give that away, guess what? I get to bless you with more. I get to give you even more. But no, I'm going to give it away. I'm never going to see it again. No. He says, no, you give it away and you're going to get more. You're going to get more. Why? Because you can be trusted to be a manager and not an owner. And here's the reality that you and I have to come into grips with. This is the part that I said you don't really like to admit, but we know. Ownership is really a myth anyway, isn't it? Ownership is a myth. As much as we want to keep in control, as much as we wish we owned it all, ownership is a myth. Why? Because Luke 12, Jesus tells us, if it can all be taken away, then guess what? It never really belonged to you anyway. All the stuff that you're saving, all the stuff that you have for you, all the stuff that you think you want, that you need, that you're stockpiling, guess what? If it can all be taken away, then guess what? You never owned it anyway. And so if you never owned it anyway, why don't you manage effectively what's been given to you today? Use that for God and His glory. And here's what will happen. Not only do you bless other people, but you end up living the blessed life. That you end up living a blessed life. That your life takes on new meaning. Here's the other one. Generous people, they don't assume that it's all theirs to consume. They just don't. They don't assume that it's all theirs to consume. They never even go there. They're thankful for what God has given to them, but they see that when I am given more, that means I have now the capacity to do even more. Why? Because God has given some to me, He's entrusted it with me, but I still hold it open-handed. I have a plan for generosity. We're going to talk about, like I said, practical next steps next week. I hope you'll come and join us and figure out something else to do, because I think we need this. Again, if we're going to grow spiritually, if we're going to get a better grasp of the heart of God for our life, we have to be talking about these kinds of things that sometimes just make us uncomfortable, that make us assess where we're at, that cause us to wrestle with what does our life really look like? What is our life really centered on? Here's the last one is this. Generous people, guess what? They choose, this is a choice that you can make. They choose to live with the trust that God will take care of us. They choose to live in the trust that God, He's going to take care of us. That if the earth belongs to God and everything in it and everyone in it is all His, then why wouldn't a good, loving God take care of His children that He has given everything for? Why wouldn't He do that? We trust that God will take care of us. It is who God is. So how do we reorient our lives around this generosity? How do we take the focus off of us and place it back on God? Jesus tells us how, Matthew 6, seek first the kingdom and His righteousness. Seek first the kingdom and seek God and His righteousness. Seek this, not a scarcity mentality, not a consumer mentality, but seek first a kingdom mentality. A kingdom mentality where God changes the way that we think. We begin to see through a different lens. Seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and guess what happens? And all these things, all those things you worry about, all those things you're stressed over, all those things, I don't know how to, guess what? All these things, it just falls into place. It's given to you as well. You're well taken care of. You'll have everything that you need. Jesus says, this is my promise to you. This is my promise. You know why? Because he follows it up with a therefore. Based on what you know about this, seeking first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, knowing that he will provide everything for you, this is what he follows up with for your worry cycle. He says, so therefore, don't worry. You don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about tomorrow. You know why? Because tomorrow's got enough drama. We need to stay focused on today. Don't even worry about what's going on tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be a whole new set of stuff, right? Tomorrow's going to be a whole new issue. Tomorrow's going to be a whole new whatever. But we can still trust. If we begin, listen, you begin to put in the habit of trusting God today, then guess what will happen? You'll trust him tomorrow. But if you're not trusting God today, it's going to be difficult to trust him tomorrow. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow's going to worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble on its own. Here's my invitation to you, which is Jesus' invitation to you, to orient your life around generosity. It breaks the crazy train of worry. It gets you in a right focus. It places him as first in your life. And when we do that, we truly begin to live the blessed life. Let's pray. God, thank you for today. Thank you for your love, your grace, your mercy, your care, your concern for us, God. Lord, you want us to live blessed. Lord, not just a good life, not just an okay life, but a life of abundance. And you are an abundant God, a God who cares, a God who loves us, a God who wants more for our lives. And so, Father, as we consider what this looks like, as we consider the way we're living our life right now, Father, I pray that you would do such an incredible work in our hearts, that it begins to change the way that we think, that we would see through a different lens, Lord, that we would begin to place our trust in you as we grow in you, as we come to know you more. Father, do that work in our lives today, I pray. In Jesus' name.